Fred Pure Radio, this is Chiara Nicoletti from the 41st Torino Film Festival. I'm glad to be with Noah Pritzker, who's here to present Ex-Husbands. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I would say welcome back on Fred, since you were on Kinotico and Fred in San Sebastian.
Yes, I'm thrilled to be back.
So as I was telling you before, I wanted to follow up on that interview, but I noticed that there were some things missing about the film. But my first question is, I'm always making fun of, made fun of, because I see coming of ages everywhere, even with the films that apparently are not. But in this case, I felt that maybe we could think about this story as a late coming of age.
For the father, for
Yes.
Peter. I think that's interesting. I've had that thought. And he is sort of in he's a man in his late 60s, and yet in a short period of time, he's losing his both of his parents. His wife is leaving him, and his children are kind of going off and becoming men. And so I think through all of that loss, he's sort of reborn and has to figure out who he is again as a man in his late 60s. And so I think that's a very astute a reading of the movie. I've had that thought that it is sort of like a coming of age movie, but about a 67-year-old man.
But what was the starting point? Because I like the fact that you're talking about an elder man, so technically not something that you directly, you can take from your own experience, I guess.
Yeah, I always felt very connected to Peter, Griffin Dunn's character, and even though my world is probably a little closer to the younger men in the movie are closer to my age. There was something about him spiritually and about the way he's seeking and his loneliness and his wanting to fit in and wanting to be one of the guys, but also not want to be, he doesn't need full acceptance. He kind of just wants to be around. There was something about him that I immediately, when I started writing him and kind of seeing him on the page, that just felt very accessible and knowable about him. And, I ironically had to wrestle more with some of the other characters who were closer to me. And maybe that's why it was harder to flesh those characters out, because, it's easier to fall back on your own experience. Whereas with Peter, it was kind of, there were more boundaries around him as a character.
When you were working on a script and on the film, did you think about how he must have been when he was younger?
I think it was there. It was a family that I could envision what those years were like. And, in the movie, Peter refers a few times to kind of his earlier, looser, more, maybe party days where he was... And I think I liked that glimpse into his life, that there was a time when he wasn't so hemmed in or oppressed and could let loose. I think it's been a long time probably since Peter really allowed himself to let loose. And so I think it's, as I was getting, trying to figure out what Peter's life might have looked like before, I think, it was helpful to do that through Peter's own eyes of trying to get to know himself again.
Why Griffin Dunn, and how did you change Peter, if you did, while working with him on the film?
Yeah, Griffin, once the idea came up, I think it was actually my wife had gone to see a screening of his Joan Didion documentary in New York, and she had heard me talk about this script and who I was thinking would be right for it, and she said, I really think you should see if you can get to Griffin. He'd be perfect. And I mentioned it to my producer, who also happened to be an old friend of Griffin's. And so that part of it happened kind of organically, and then then COVID happened, and so in that period, Griffin and I kind of just became friends, and would spend a lot of time just talking on the phone or get lunch every now and again when we were able to. And then I would go back and kind of look at the script, and I would rewrite it with Griffin in mind. And so I did sort of, tailor make the part for him after the fact once he got involved, but it happened very naturally. I was getting to know him as a friend, and there was no pressure of time because during COVID, it was unclear when we would ever get to make this movie. So it was kind of just when I felt excited about it or curious or bored because of quarantine, I would take a look at the script and maybe think about a conversation I had with Griffin. But it was sort of nice that my relationship with him existed outside of the film. It wasn't all about, figuring out the character.
Was the film also a way for you to explore, the father-son relationship, or at least, parents-sons relationship?
Yeah, I think in earlier drafts, maybe it was more about the brothers and their relationship with each other, and them trying to understand their father, and in that somehow, I think the father sort of emerged as the protagonist. And I'm in my case, I'm the son. I'm the middle of three sons, and the Peter is definitely not my. There's not a one-to-one correlation between Peter and my father. They're quite different. But I do think there was a lot of questions I had about fathers and sons and siblings and the dynamic therein that I got to explore through the screenplay. And then, the beauty of making a movie is you invite all of these other people in who have their own experience as fathers or sons or mothers or daughters or husbands or ex-wives or wives. And so I think that, really opened up a whole new world for me.
Yes, we all see a different movie, as it always happens, but in this case, there are so many questions.
Yeah.
And then we ask, from San Sebastian on, how was the journey with this film, and was there something in particular that people felt about your film that you were particularly happy about?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. We started in Spain, and then had screenings in New York and Mexico and Poland, and so I've gotten to really travel, and Stockholm. So it's been fascinating to travel all over the world and show the movie and see how people respond to it. And I think the through line has been a question about men and masculinity and the portrayal of these men and the way they try and in some ways succeed and in other ways fail at being more communicative and vulnerable and open, which, I don't think it's a shock to anyone that we're in a moment where men, are allowed to or supposed to and encouraged to self-reflect a little bit more. And so I have been surprised at how, that people still seem so moved by that idea. Setting out to make the movie, I didn't think I want to make a movie about sensitive men. I wanted to make a movie about fathers and sons and my experience of it. And it has been sort of exciting and interesting to see that has resonated, everywhere we've shown the movie.
How is Torino going so far? What did you expect, and what's
It's been
happening?
great. I got in yesterday afternoon after a long journey from New York. So I'm still getting a handle on it. I had a great dinner last night, and
That's good.
And I'm hoping today to get to a museum and walk around and get to know the city a little bit. I'm still a little bleary-eyed from my flight.
So good luck with
you.
Ex-Husbands
Thank you.
at 41st Torino Film Festival. No, Pritzker, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. And this is Chiara Nicoletti for Fred, the Festival Insider.